Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, October 5th, 2022. President Joe Biden traveling to Florida to tour the damage from Hurricane Ian, met by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, the two from opposite political parties and often clashing publicly on other issues, pledging cooperation when it comes to helping the people of Florida recover from the hurricane's immense damage. President Biden saying it's going to take a hell of a long time, hopefully without any snags in the way. Later, after the television cameras have moved on, we're still going to be here with you. Ministers from the major oil-producing countries, a group known as OPEC Plus, announcing a cut in oil production of 2 million barrels per day, which may raise gas prices globally. White House saying that President Biden is disappointed in what he calls a short-sighted decision at a time when the global economy is dealing with the continued negative impact of Russian President Putin's invasion of Ukraine. SpaceX launching a crew to the International Space Station, which includes a Russian cosmonaut. First time a cosmonaut has gone into space from U.S. soil in 2 decades. We'll hear from the head of the Russian Space Agency. And the British Prime Minister Liz Truss giving her first speech as leader to the Conservative Party conference, promising to get their country through what she calls stormy days. Her speech interrupted by environmental protesters. And we start with the response to the hurricane, President Biden and First Lady Jill Biden in Florida. This from Associated Press. President Biden toured the hurricane-ravaged areas of Florida on Wednesday, surveying storm damage by helicopter and encouraging local residents on foot alongside Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. The political foes pledged to put that rivalry aside and marshal federal, state, and local help to rebuild homes, businesses, and lives. The article goes on. Governor DeSantis and his wife Casey greeted the President and First Lady Jill Biden as they arrived at Fisherman's Wharf, where homes and businesses lay in ruins amid debris and muck after Hurricane Ian tore through last week. Both the leaders speaking about the cooperation between the federal and state governments on this issue. First, Governor DeSantis.
Good afternoon, and I want to thank President Biden and Jill Biden, as well as Administrator Deanne Criswell for coming down here, looking at really significant damage here in Lee County, and there's other places where you have really significant damage as well outside of this general area. We were very fortunate to have good coordination with the White House and with FEMA from the very beginning of this. We declared a state of emergency last Friday, September 23rd. This was a disturbance out there by Columbia, and then the next day we got a major disaster declaration approved by the president, and we really appreciated that. And that basically set off the massive mobilization that we had ready to be able to respond to this storm. As of now, there have been over 2,500 rescues effectuated. There have been close to 100,000 structures in the most hard-hit areas that have been searched. We've deployed resources that were pre-staged and are now in the field for food, water, and other types of supplies. There's 28 different points of distribution across the affected areas. 45 million bottles of water have been served, 2 million pounds of ice. We had, prior to the storm, 42,000 linemen stationed throughout Florida ready to be on site to restore power as soon as the storm has passed. Today, we have over 97% of the state that has power.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in Fort Myers welcoming President Biden. It was also announced today that as the governor is running for re-election, the only scheduled debate between him and his Democratic Party opponent, Congressman and former Governor Charlie Crist, has been postponed due to the widespread damage from Hurricane Ian. The original debate was scheduled for October 12th in Fort Pierce, about an hour from West Palm Beach. After Governor DeSantis' remarks, President Biden spoke.
Well, Gov, the First Lady, thank you very much for the hospitality. And, I want to thank the mayor and the county chair. Cecil took me on a little helicopter ride, and we went out to Sanibel Island and all across. And I'm sure it's much worse on the ground, but you can see a whole hell of a lot of the damage from the air. And you can imagine, because unfortunately, I've been to a lot of disaster areas in the last couple months, last 6 months. More fires have burned in the west and the southwest, burned everything right to the ground than the entire state of New Jersey, as much room as that takes up. And the reservoirs out west are down to almost zero. We're in a situation where the Colorado River looks more like a stream. There's a lot going on. And I think the one thing this has finally ended is a discussion about whether or not there's climate change and we should do something about it. But folks, I also want to, Jill and I have had you all in our prayers, and I mean that sincerely. And we're here today because we wanted to tell you in person that we're thinking of you and we're not leaving. We're not leaving until this gets done. I promise you that. You know, when you walk around here, what's left of Fisherman's Wharf, and you don't have to have much of an imagination to understand that everything is historic, titanic, and unimaginable storm just ripped it to pieces. You got to start from scratch, got to move again. And it's going to take a lot of time, not weeks or months. It's going to take years for everything to get squared away in the state of Florida, to fully recover and rebuild. We're here today with Governor DeSantis and Senator Rubio and Senator Scott and Congressman Donald. You know, today we have one job, and only one job, and that's to make sure the people of Florida get everything that they need to fully, thoroughly recover. We're one of the few nations in the world that, on the basis of a crisis we face, we're the only nation that comes out of it better than we went into it. And that's what we're going to do this time around, come out of it better, because this is the United States of America, and I emphasize united.
President Biden in Fort Myers, Florida, with, as he mentioned, Governor Ron DeSantis, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Rick Scott, Congressman Byron Donalds, all of them Republicans. At the end of his prepared remarks, reporters asked the president a couple of questions on that wharf. One of them was, how do you think Governor DeSantis is doing in responding to the hurricane?
How's Governor DeSantis handling this recovery?
Biden, I think he's done a good job. Look, I called him, I think before he called me when I heard about the storm. We worked hand in glove. We have very different political philosophies, but we worked hand in glove. And he's been on safety related and dealing with this crisis. We've been completely lockstep, but no difference.
Okay, well, guys, we gotta go.
President Biden with reporters talking about the different political philosophies that he and Governor DeSantis have, but on this issue, responding to a hurricane, politics is put aside. One other moment that the president's visit that's making a little bit of news as he shook hands with Fort Myers Beach Mayor Ray Murphy, and the two sharing a laugh as the mayors thanked him and told him to keep the faith. On a hot mic, the president is heard saying no one F's with Biden, and he did say it. More from the Associated Press article, the president visiting an area especially devastated by winds and surging tides. Boats, including huge yachts, were capsized and hurled inland. As water receded, the destruction at Fort Myers Fisherman's Wharf became evident. Homes and businesses lay in ruins. Amid debris and muck, the wharf lies on one side of the bridge that leads into Fort Myers Beach, which was brutalized by the Category 4 storm. FEMA Administrator Deanne Criswell told reporters on Air Force One Wednesday that the cost of rebuilding will be huge. That from AP. Well, WhiteHouse.gov fed the audio of Administrator Criswell taking reporters' questions during the flight on Air Force One from Washington, D.C. to Florida. It included the announcement that the Biden administration doubling the length of time the federal government will cover all the costs associated with search and rescue and debris removal and sheltering and other emergency measures from 30 to 60 days.
The disaster declaration has been extended another 30 days. Do you have an estimate of how much this is going to cost the federal government?
Yeah, we are still very much in the life-saving and stabilization mode. They are just beginning the assessments of what the actual extent of damages to the infrastructure. It's going to be in the billions. How many billions, I don't know yet, but it will certainly be in the billions, and perhaps one of the more costly disasters that we've seen in many years.
And a follow-up to Francesca's question is, people do start to rebuild and consider where they're going to rebuild. Does the White House's administration have any recommendation as far as rebuilding in these areas that we saw completely wiped off? Now that weather is changing, climate change is taking an impact, should they reconsider possibly building on some of those beaches and coastal areas?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think the biggest thing that from FEMA's perspective, we want to make sure people understand what their risk is so they can make informed decisions about where they want to rebuild. Ultimately, zoning and codes and standards are a state responsibility, but our focus is going to be making sure that we educate people on what their risk is so they can make better decisions on what they're going to do as they choose to rebuild there or if they choose to go somewhere else.
Talk a little bit about what FEMA is doing to reach some of the underserved communities, places that might not have access to the internet, might not be able to get in touch with you as easily as some of the other places.
We have disaster survivor assistance teams. They have been going out into neighborhoods. They walk with their iPads and they can help people register that way. Honestly, one of the best things is when you all give us information about some of the communities that feel like they haven't been heard. And we heard about the Dunbar community. As soon as we got that information, we sent teams out into that community and we were able to register people on the spot. And so there's a lot of people impacted by this. Really appreciate the feedback that we get from the press to let us know if there's areas that we're missing so we can get those teams, those disaster survivor assistance teams, in those areas.
Administrator of FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, Deanne Criswell, speaking with reporters on Air Force One as President Biden flew down from Washington, D.C. to Florida. Now to gas prices. This story from CNBC. A group of some of the world's most powerful oil producers on Wednesday agreed to impose deep output cuts, seeking to spur a recovery in crude prices despite calls from the U.S. to pump more to help the global economy. OPEC and non-OPEC allies, a group often referred to as OPEC Plus, decided at their first face-to-face gathering since 2020 to cut production by 2 million barrels per day from November. The move represents a major reversal in production policy for the alliance, which slashed output cuts by a record 10 million barrels per day in early 2020 when demand crashed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. The oil cartel has since gradually unwound those record cuts, albeit with several OPEC Plus countries struggling to fulfill their quotas. That reporting from CNBC. Oil prices have fallen to about $80 per barrel from over $120 per barrel in early June. Back to Air Force One, reporters asking the White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre about this.
Based on what OPEC's proposed, two questions. One, does the U.S. view Saudis as a trustworthy partner? And two, would a production cut in oil help Putin because it would raise prices possibly?
So there was a statement on the OPEC decision that went out while we were all in the air. It came out from Jake Sullivan and Brian Deese. So just wanted to make sure that you guys are all aware of that. So let me just say a couple of things and just kind of lift up some of the things that came up came out of that statement. So OPEC's decision to cut production's quotas is short-sighted while the global economy is dealing with the continued negative impact of Putin's invasion of Ukraine. If there's a meaningful price impact of OPEC's decision, it will particularly be on low and middle income countries. The president's efforts have made progress bringing down U.S. gas prices since the beginning of the summer. Gas prices are down nearly $1.20, and the most common price at gas stations today is $3.29 per gallon. The president is determined to ensure that progress continues. At the president's direction, the Department of Energy will deliver another 10 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve to the market next month as part of the historic 180 million barrel release the president ordered back in March. And the president will continue to direct SPR releases as necessary. He is directing the Secretary of Energy to explore any additional responsible actions to continue increasing domestic production, which is on track to break a historic record next year. And the president is once again calling on U.S. energy companies to keep bringing pump prices down by closing the historically large gap between wholesale and retail gas prices. In light of today's action, the president's administration will also consult with Congress on additional tools and authorities to reduce OPEC's control over energy prices. And lastly, today's announcement is a reminder of why it is so critical that the United States reduce its reliance on foreign sources of fossil fuels. With the Inflation Reduction Act, we are making a historic investment in accelerating the transition to clean energy. As it relates to Russia, your last question first. Look, it's clear that OPEC Plus is aligning with Russia with today's announcement, and I'll leave it as that, as I just laid out. We're dealing with a time where we are, the global markets, the global economy is responding to Putin's war, and so by making this decision, it is going to have an effect on low and middle economic income countries, and so that is where we are today. So I'll leave it there. And what was your first question? I missed it.
Are the Saudis a trustworthy partner?
What we think is that this decision by OPEC Plus is one purported self-interest is a mistake, and it's misguided.
The White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre on Air Force One with reporters. AAA says that gasoline prices across the United States is averaging today $3.83 per gallon. Congress is not in session today, but members tweeting about this news. In many cases, Republicans emphasizing more domestic production, Democrats focusing on reducing use of fossil fuels. Senator Bill Cassidy, Republican from Louisiana, tweeting, U.S. gas prices are about to spike again because the Biden administration has supported a 2-year assault on American energy production and subjected us to the mercy of OPEC, unleash American energy to lower the price at the pump. And this from Congressman Sean Casten, Democrat from Illinois. The faster we decarbonize our economy, the sooner we won't have to worry about this. Until then, don't forget the obvious people who sell oil want to sell at the highest possible price. That is just as true for domestic as foreign producers. Voice of America reporting on the announcement today. OPEC, along with Russia and other oil producers on Wednesday, slashed production by 2 million barrels a day. They write it's an action that could help Moscow pay for its war with Ukraine and hurt U.S. President Joe Biden's chances to further cut gas prices for American motorists. That article goes on. The production cut was seen as a rebuke to President Biden, who visited Saudi Arabia in July in what now has turned out to be a futile effort to persuade the world's second biggest oil producer after the United States to refrain from cutting production. That came up today with a question to the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, visiting Chile and holding a joint news conference with the Chilean foreign minister.
As you must know, OPEC has just agreed to an oil production cut of 2 million barrels a day. You joined President Biden on what was a somewhat controversial trip to Saudi Arabia recently that the president justified in part on the grounds of working with the Saudis to control oil costs. What is your reaction to this decision, and are you specifically disappointed in the Saudis?
First, what we've been clear about is the need for energy supply to meet demand. That's what we've been working on across the board, and we've done our part. United States oil production is up by more than 500,000 barrels a day. As you know, we have tapped into the Strategic Petroleum Reserve as well to make sure that energy is on the market and also as a way to stabilize prices. Indeed, energy prices have come down as a result of the efforts that we've made. And when it comes to OPEC, we've made clear our views to OPEC members. We have a multiplicity of interests with regard to Saudi Arabia, and I think the President laid those out during his trip, and they include everything from regional relationships, including improving relations between Arab countries and Israel, Yemen, where we're working very closely with Saudi Arabia to try to continue the truce, and a number of other issues, and those were all reflected in the visit. But we are working every single day to make sure, to the best of our ability, that, again, energy supply from wherever is actually meeting demand in order to ensure that energy is on the market and that prices are kept low.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken in Santiago, Chile, at a joint news conference with the Chilean foreign minister. Wall Street today, the Dow down 42, NASDAQ down 27, S&P down 7. Energy and climate change, topics that often come up in election debate. C-SPAN is covering many federal and state races before the November elections. Today, a debate for Kansas governor, the incumbent Democrat Laura Kelly facing Republican challenger, the Attorney General of Kansas, Derek Schmidt. Moderator Nick Haynes, a news host and executive producer of public affairs programs at Kansas City PBS. Here is a question about energy and climate.
California has been making the national headlines. We're becoming the first state to say by 2035 we're not going to sell any new gas-powered vehicles. You can still drive your old ones, but you can't sell new ones. Would you roll out such a plan in Kansas, Governor Kelly, in your next 4 years? If not, what's the biggest change you would propose to improve the environment?
Well, I think you know that we just landed the Panasonic electric battery factory. That will go a long ways to ensuring that we do move to electricity. You know, Kansas is really uniquely focused, though, to lead the way in expansion of renewable energy. You know, we're strong on wind, solar, biofuels, and now even green hydrogen. So when I think about climate change and those kinds of things, I really see it as a huge job creation opportunity for our state. And we are doing everything in our Department of Commerce and Department of Agriculture to ensure that we're bringing those kinds of companies to our state to further our economy, but also to contribute to cleaner energy.
Derek Schmidt.
Well, I didn't quite hear the governor's answer to the question, which is whether she would advocate policies like California's. My answer to that is no. I think Kansas is a wonderful place, and we don't want to be more like California. And I do not think their command and control approach is the right way to deal with energy policy. I support an all of the above energy policy. I think that has to include renewables and things that are going to move us into that space. But it also has to include our traditional energy sources, because they are the many Kansas families who are struggling financially today because of Laura Kelly's big spending and Joe Biden's inflation. I've stood up and fought back against many of the overreaching regulatory actions of the Biden administration that continue to add to those costs in terms of energy. And so far, the governor's taken no stance on that.
Laura Kelly, 30 seconds to rebut.
Yeah, I think I'm on the record of also being an all-of-the-above approach to our energy issues, and I will continue to be that. But I do think that we're moving towards more and more renewables, and I think that Kansas needs to jump on that opportunity to bring those businesses to Kansas.
Final word to you, Derek Schmidt.
Well, enough said, so let me just go back. You know, the governor has an unhealthy obsession with one of her predecessors who served in office 8 years ago. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how many times she says it, the fact of the matter is Kansans are far less worried about what some former governor did or mistakes he made than they are about the mistakes this administration is making every single day that's making their lives harder and more expensive. And one of those mistakes is a refusal to stand up to the Biden administration when it does things like attack the Kansas oil and gas industry that is so critical for this state's economy.
Thank you so much.
Kansas governor debate today. The Republican challenger is Derek Schmidt. He's currently the state attorney general, facing the incumbent Governor Laura Kelly, Democrat, going for a second term. That from Kansas City PBS, part of C-SPAN's Campaign 2022 coverage. We've got live coverage coming up on Thursday, October 6th at 8 p.m. Eastern. A Senate debate in Iowa. The incumbent Chuck Grassley, Republican, facing the Democratic challenger Mike Franken. And then at 9 p.m. Eastern on Thursday, an Arizona U.S. Senate debate. The incumbent is Democrat Mark Kelly. Republican challenger is Blake Masters. Also, there's a Libertarian candidate in that race, Mark Victor. And looking ahead to Friday, October 7th, 8 p.m. Eastern, U.S. Senate debate from Wisconsin. The incumbent is Republican Ron Johnson. He is facing Democratic challenger Mandela Barnes. You can listen to them all on C-SPAN Radio live. They'll also be on C-SPAN Television, streamed at cspan.org, or on the C-SPAN Now mobile video app. And go to cspan.org to find our complete Campaign 22 debate coverage. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. An article at Reuters, U.S. authorities seized 15,000 rainbow-colored fentanyl pills hidden in a Lego toy box destined for distribution in New York City, the city's largest such seizure to date, according to the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid 50 times stronger than heroin, and it's among the leading drivers of a nationwide overdose epidemic that's claimed more than 100,000 lives in the United States in the last year. That from Reuters. The House Republican leader, Kevin McCarthy, tweeting today, "I just finished an in-depth meeting about the fentanyl crisis with law enforcement educators and parents from my hometown of Bakersfield. Every community in America is being affected. It's past time we do something about it." It's Bakersfield, California. The Republican leader attaching a news conference that he held today.
What I want to do is bring together from our law enforcement, from DEA, from FBI, from Bakersfield City Police, from our district attorney, from Highway Patrol, and educators and treatment facilities. Because what I have found happening in America today is an epidemic. The number one killer of Americans between the ages of 18 and 45 is fentanyl. It's poisoning our community. It's poisoning our children for the future. We've heard the stories nationwide, but we've heard the stories here locally, all the way down to junior high as well. And I wanted to look as a policymaker, what are the things legislatively I can do? There's a couple things I walked away with from today. The HIDA, a group that we can actually work together, the high intensity drug enforcement ability, from our DA, from our city, from the DEA, from the FBI, from Homeland Security, is working. But there's limitations from it. A cap for how long individuals, the federal government, would pay for you working on a case. The coordination in between. What I also learned is something that makes me more fearful as well. A lot of the great abilities of why we're located here centrally in California, across the nation, from Highway 5 to 58 and others, also why we think we're a great distribution center for goods and others, also means it's a distribution center for the cartels to supply fentanyl throughout the country. And how can we get out in front of that? We know some of our limitations for what the state has done for making it harder to prosecute, harder to go after. But what we're watching is individuals going after our children. And the one thing everybody should know, that with social media today, with Snapchat and others, there are people who are dying with one pill, but aren't buying fentanyl. They're buying Xanax. Maybe something to keep them up to be able to study. This is one that we've got to educate our public about, all the way down to the parents, just in elementary as well. It's a scary situation. But what we really need to do is stop the poison coming from China to our borders of Mexico and the cartels bringing it to poison and kill American citizens. So there's a number of pieces of legislation that I will take back to introduce to help those who are working, but also to stop fentanyl from poisoning our country.
The House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Republican from California, at a roundtable on fentanyl in Bakersfield, California. He tweeted that news conference. He is possibly going to be the Speaker of the House if the Republicans take over after the November elections and get a majority, so the bills that he's talking about could come up for votes should that happen. A new government report on Latino representation in the media released today that says in the past decade, quote, little change occurred. The Government Accountability Office, or GAO, report finding the percentage of Latino employees in the news business rose from 11% in 2010 to 12% in 2019, even though Latinos make up about 20% of the U.S. population. And Latinos in media more likely to be in service positions than in senior and executive management jobs. The service positions 19%, the senior jobs 3%. Report requested by members of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, part of a series of reports on this issue. The former chair of the caucus, Congressman Joaquin Castro, Democrat from Texas, speaking about it today at the National Press Club in Washington.
You all know that we're in the middle of a political season now, and we've got just over a month to go until this big midterm election. And many of the folks in this room, I know many of you all understand how campaign commercials work, played on repeat. Negative ads played over and over and over can help sear an impression of a candidate or something else in the public's mind. That's why candidates run for 2 weeks or 4 weeks or 6 weeks, the same negative ads over and over. I would compare those political ads and the negativity to what Hollywood has done for generations to Latinos, running the same ad over and over of Latinos being criminals or convicts or gang members or drug runners, Latinas as hypersexualized. There is an effect over time on the audience of that kind of delivery. For decades, the American media industry has been running an extended commercial about Latinos that focuses on the most harmful stereotypes of who we are. On screen and on the front pages of major newspapers, Latinos are portrayed as gangbangers, as drug dealers, and as quote-unquote illegals. These depictions obscure the positive real-life roles of Latinos as essential workers who got us through the early days of the pandemic, immigrant entrepreneurs giving new life to cities in the Midwest, and trailblazers across almost every American industry. So it's not just a question that we're talking about today of which actor or actress gets a role in a particular movie or TV show. The defining images and narratives that come out of American media affect every Latino or Latina, no matter their walk of life, who, for example, may be interviewing to be an accountant, a lawyer, an engineer, or a teacher, in a room full of strangers who see them as American media has defined our community. In other words, all of us walking around with brown skin or with a Spanish last name or however we identify as Latino are somehow marked by that generations-long campaign that I spoke about and continues today. And as these negative stereotypes permeate the American imagination, they become dangerous tools for unscrupulous politicians to use and abuse for their own gain. The result, the marriage of political expediency and damning stereotypes, produces in its worst iteration the kind of tragedy we saw in El Paso, Texas, where a madman drove 10 hours to stop what he called the, quote, Hispanic invasion of Texas.
Congressman Joaquin Castro, Democrat from Texas, at the National Press Club today. You can find the full video. C-SPAN was there covering it at our website at cspan.org. The congressman says he's sending a letter to the Federal Communications Commission and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission asking them to move quickly to implement the recommendations from this government report to address Latino underrepresentation in the media, including, as CNN reports, the EEOC sharing discrimination filing reports with the FCC, which can perform audits and drop penalties on companies previously flagged by the former agency. SpaceX today launching 4 astronauts to the International Space Station, 2 from the United States, 1 from Japan, and 1 from Russia. First time in 20 years that a Russian astronaut has taken off from U.S. soil bound for the ISS. Also, one of the Americans, Nicole Mann, commander of the mission, is now the first Native American woman in outer space. C-SPAN covered the launch as well from the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
We should get the final go for launch from SpaceX launch director Mark Soltis.
Dragon, SpaceX, Godspeed, go for launch.
SpaceX Dragon, go for launch.
SpaceX reports go, crew reports go, 30 seconds until liftoff.
T-minus 15. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ignition, engines full power, and liftoff.
Launch of the SpaceX Crew 5 mission to the International Space Station, Falcon 9 rocket, and Dragon spacecraft. Later, NASA hosting a post-launch news conference. Reporters asking Sergei Kirkalev, the executive director of the Russian space agency Roscosmos, about the Russian cosmonaut on board, also U.S.-Russian relations, and Russia's war in Ukraine.
Marcia Dunn, Associated Press for Sergey. How does it feel for you being back here launching Cosmonauts again from Kennedy Space Center? You were the first, after all. And also for your staff in Moscow, has the war been a distraction for them? The longer it goes, do you worry about them being distracted or having their work impacted by what's going on around them? Thank you.
Crew, which is flying now in space, which just launched in space tomorrow, they have a pretty tight schedule. They have a lot of assignment, and they will do what they're supposed to do. They were trained for that. So I hope distraction from what is going on the ground would be minimum, because we are trying to focus on scientific tasks, on engineering tasks, and crew will do what they're supposed to do. As for me, as I said, I was very pleased to be here again. I remember being here a long time ago when we start previous phase of our cooperation, when we start to do our shuttle missions, and then Mir shuttle program, and then construction of International Space Station. So for me, I'm very glad to see all friends, all colleagues, and as I said, I hope we will cooperate together the way it was started in 1975.
I didn't mean the crew being distracted. I meant flight controllers. Your team in Moscow, are they being distracted by the ongoing war in Ukraine and what's going on?
They also do what they're supposed to do. They do their duty, and actually we have a team not only in Moscow but also in Houston. We have a group of Russians who is in Russian mission control. We have a group of Americans who is in mission control in Moscow, and a group of Russians in mission control in Houston. So this group is very focused on do what they're supposed to do.
Sergei Kirkilev is now executive director of Roscosmos, the Russian space agency, a former cosmonaut himself, at today's news conference after the SpaceX launch. In Russia, President Vladimir Putin signing laws that claim 4 regions of Ukraine as Russian territory, annexing Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia. This following those referendums in the regions which the U.S. and other Western countries have not recognized as legitimate, and Ukraine's military recently carrying out successful counterattacks, reclaiming the conquered territory and pushing Russian forces back. In Great Britain today, the ruling Conservative Party closing out its autumn conference in Birmingham with a speech by the Prime Minister Liz Truss, who's been in office for just about a month, although the Conservative Party has been the majority in government now for a dozen years. This from BBC News. Liz Truss has promised to get the country through stormy days as she set out her plans to grow the economy. In her speech at the Tory conference, which has been marked by U-turns and internal division, the PM admitted her policies would cause disruption, but she insisted the status quo is not an option, adding, "We must stay the course."
We gather at a vital time for the United Kingdom. These are stormy days. Together, we've mourned the death of Queen Elizabeth II, the rock on which modern Britain was built. We're now in a new era under King Charles III. We're dealing with the global economic crisis caused by COVID and by Putin's appalling war in Ukraine. In these tough times, we need to step up. I'm determined to get Britain moving, to get us through the tempest, and to put us on a stronger footing as a nation. I'm driven in this mission by my firm belief in the British people. I believe that you know best how to spend your own money, to get on in life, and to realise your ambitions. My friends, that is what conservatism is about. It's a belief in freedom, in fair play, and the great potential of the British people. So I'm not going to tell you what to do, or what to think, or how to live your life. I'm not interested in how many 2-for-1 offers you buy at the supermarket, or how you spend your spare time, or in virtue signalling. I'm not interested in just talking about things, but actually in doing things. What I'm interested in is your hopes and fears that you feel every day. Can you get a good job locally? Is it safe to walk down the high street late at night? Can you get a doctor's appointment? I know how you feel because I have the same hopes and fears. I want what you want.
The British Prime Minister Liz Truss at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham, England. At one point in her speech, she was interrupted by environmental protesters from the group Greenpeace, one holding a sign reading, "Who voted for this?"
And that's why I promised on entering Downing Street to act. Let's get them removed. Now, later on in my speech, my friends, I'm going to talk about the anti-growth coalition. But I think they arrived in the hall a bit too early. They were meant to come later on, so we'll get on to them. We'll get on to them in a few minutes.
The British Prime Minister Liz Truss. The British newspaper Independent reporting on this incident this way. Liz Truss drew the ire of campaigners and some of her own party after blaming the UK's economic woes on a supposed anti-growth coalition of opposition parties, trade unions, think tanks, environmentalists, and opponents of Brexit in her first Tory conference speech as leader. It goes on, countryside campaigner, the CPRE, said the Prime Minister's disingenuous and misleading broadside presented a false choice between the economy and the environment, while Tory former cabinet minister Stephen Dorrell branded her comments Orwellian. That's how the Independent put it. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word to get the stories Washington is talking about sent to your inbox every day. You can subscribe at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night.